Welcome to Madang. Today's guest is Reverend Bruce Reyes-Chow, a fellow Presbyterian church minister. In this episode, he discusses AAPI Heritage Month, how we need to celebrate and stop AAPI hate crimes and violence towards the AAPI community. And then he discusses his latest book, In Defense of Kindness. Please stay tuned.
Mandy Ford is an artist and teacher specializing in hope-filled products, including stickers and art prints, digital and printable products, and creative courses to help your soul live a happier life. She is also the founder of Soul Care Creatives Club, a monthly membership club offering creative resources for soul care. Find out more at www.mandyford.co, follow her on her social media at mandyfordart, and visit her shop at mandyfordart.etsy.com. Diana Butler Bass goes beyond the culture wars to offer a refreshing take on the comprehensive, multifaceted nature of Jesus, keeping his teachings relevant and alive in our daily lives. Join the Louisville Institute to celebrate the retirement of Don C. Ryder as Associate Director on June 28, 2021, from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time via Zoom. For free registration, go to www.facebook.com/Louisville Institute for more information. For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com. This is Madang, an outdoor living room for guests to share their experiences and their work. I invite you to come in and stay for a while.
Welcome to Madang. I'm so glad you're with us today. I have a very special friend, a wonderful guest, Reverend Bruce Reyes-Chow. He's an author, speaker, parent, consultant, coach, podcaster, and pastor. He speaks and writes on issues of faith, technology, race, parenting, and church culture. He has been an ordained pastor in the Presbyterian Church USA for over 25 years and is currently the senior pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto, senior consultant with the Convergence Network, and a Gallup certified strengths coach. He hosts the podcast BRC and Friends and is the author of 4 exciting books. His latest is In Defense of Kindness, subtitle In Defense of Kindness, Why It Matters, How It Changes Our Lives, and How It Can Change the World, published by Chalice Press, 2021. He has an active online presence and can be found on most social networks via Bruce B. Reyes-Chow. So thank you so much, Bruce, for coming on today. It's so exciting. And I'm a little nervous because you have been podcast host for so many years and I'm just new at this. You're my 7th guest. So I'm very new at this. So I'm so nervous that I'm going to mess this up. But I'm so glad you can join with me today. I'm very excited to talk about your book. But before we get into the book, let's just talk a little bit about your family and how you are surviving the pandemic. And I know your youngest is a senior. So just share a little bit about your family.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad to be here. I'm glad to reconnect. And, I always think of you as like every month, it seems like you've written a new amazing book. I'm like, how does somebody just keep writing so many books? Like, how many do you have going on at the same time so that and then you just casually.
You know what? No, it's only a certain amount. But last week I was on a podcast and the person introduced me as the author of 32 books. And I thought, okay, I'll take it. But I had to correct him after. It's not that many. But anyway, you're too kind.
Well, I'm sure I was like 32. That probably sounds right. I'm like, I believe it. Well, and then you're just casually hanging out with, Jesse Jackson and, and Al Sharpton. You're just chilling. Yeah, because you're.
You're too kind. I was actually really excited to have both of them on my podcast. So Reverend Jackson, I was at ease with them because it was a book. But with Reverend Sharpton, I had become really ill, so I had to cancel it. And then we scheduled it, and that day the audio wasn't working.
Oh
So then we
no.
had to reschedule. So I was under a lot of kind of stress, and I felt so bad because he's so busy. But anyway, the recording went well, and he was such a gracious host, and
Oh,
it
good.
was just great to be with him because he invited us to be on his Politics Nation MSNBC. So I was just glad that he was going to actually come on my
That's great.
podcast, my
Yeah.
small little podcast. But anyway, it was great. So
That's
anyway,
awesome.
yeah, and I'm so glad you're on it too because you're such a big name. You were like the moderator of the PCUSA that I'm part of, so you're a big deal.
Well,
So I'm just
I tell my kids that it's like your dad is very important to a very small group of people. So well, again, I'm glad to be here, and I think you and I have always kind of connected because we have children that are similar ages, and we'll try not to talk about them in a way that they wouldn't want us to talk about them in public because I'm sure they're all used to like, oh my goodness, my mom, my dad, they need to
I
stop.
know. Yeah, you know what? We're very similar in that we both have three kids. The ages are very similar, and you and I are born in the same year
Yeah,
and just a day
a
apart.
day
And
apart.
both Presbyterians,
Weird.
now both podcast hosts and authors and ordained ministers. So we have a lot in common.
We
Asian
do.
American.
We do. That is so. I don't know why I didn't catch their birthday is the day after mine, but that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So in the Korean tradition, uh, even if you're just born a day ahead, I have to still call you my older brother.
I was just gonna say I'm still your elder. Let's
Yeah,
just be
you
clear.
are. You are my elder. I have to respect you. I have to like bow down to you.
That's right. That's right. I expect. Yeah. I would expect. I would expect that. I would mess with in the churches that I've worked at or started. I would mess with like the Korean Americans, and they'd come up to me. They just shake my hand, and I'm like, no. You got to shake my hand the right way. And they're like, oh my goodness. They're like, what? And I'm like, come on. I know what's going on.
Get with it. Come on.
Yeah. Let me mock on him too. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, 목사님. Hey, how do you know that word? 목사님 is Korean for minister. And we
Because
always adjust.
yeah, I mean, Moksanim and Samanim, right? Is it
Yeah, 사모님.
Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
so it was interesting. My life has been in around multi-Asian cultures because my mom, which I write about in the book, was married to a Korean American who was awful, horrible. He's in the book. I don't change his name to protect him, but he was Korean. So I was actually Bruce Kim for about 9 years. So
I can't believe you were Bruce Kim.
So I was Bruce Kim for a little bit, and then so my grandmother, Mandu, I mean, I learned all the stuff, and I still, that part of me was an experience that has formed me in a lot of different ways, and then pastoring a progressive church as an Asian American, we drew all of these Korean American young people who were in more traditional and or conservative churches of their parents. And so they came and they didn't quite know what to do with me because I'm Asian, but I'm also not Korean and not formal. So they were like, let's go. Like they would not, like they didn't know how they're supposed to address me. And so it was fun. I got to just mess with them.
Oh, that's so funny because, and you are my Asian American Pacific Islanders Heritage Month guest too. So I'm glad you shared a little bit of your Asian American background and your different father and etc. So I'm glad. Is there anything else you want to add about AAPI Heritage Month? Because you are my guest. Because so you are Asian American.
It was funny. The church I'm pastoring now, First Presbyterian Church in Palo Alto, is predominantly white, and I'm their first head of staff of color, and I've had the reason I'm there is because they're so theologically progressive, like social justice. It's every Sunday Social Justice Sunday, and I love it. I just think
wow.
It just feeds me, and they're trying to figure out how to retell their story. But I was joking with a few of them, like, well, for here, it's every month is Asian American History Month now for you all because your head of staff is Asian. So, because they're like, are we going to do anything? I'm like, you hired me. I mean, there's your Asian American history era at First Presbyterian Church.
Yeah. Oh,
So
that's wonderful. I'm glad you said that because we are important, aren't we? We are 60% of the world population. Here in the US, we're only 6%, but we are kind of like the majority of the world. But here in the US, we are so marginalized.
yeah, yeah.
So it's wonderful that you actually became the moderator of a white denomination, PCUSA, and people respect you and your leadership. So thank you so much for all that you do and you continue to do. It's very exciting to have another Asian American colleague like you kind of doing stuff. And when we get into the book, you're going to talk about activism too, and that
Mhm.
you are so active and you're fighting for social justice. So I'm so happy that there is an Asian American male, another Asian American person who is fighting the good fight and working for social justice. So
Okay. Well,
thank you so
I
much.
appreciate that. Appreciate that. I'll just take the affirmation and not deflect it. There you go.
Yeah, take it because you know what? As Asian Americans, we deflect it all the time.
Yeah.
Particularly Asian American women was like, oh
Oh
no, we
yeah.
have to hold ourselves. We have to like do all that thing for what's so embedded in our culture. So it's
Yeah.
hard to kind of accept praise and endorsements and things like that. So I'm glad you're able to take mine because I really do appreciate all that you do and the many books that you've written and the blogs and all the stuff that you do on social media and Twitter. Like I don't have that many followers, but you're there tweeting and doing all these exciting things. So thank you for
Oh,
all that you do.
again, appreciate it. Though I will say that as good Asian Americans, we have to say I'll take the affirmation rather than just take like it's an interesting dynamic, right? Where we have to so we're not I'm not really take like it's a very I get this because I don't think it's necessarily bad to defer sometimes, right? But it's at the same time like okay, my mind process is I'm gonna consciously not deflect and defer and receive it. It's a fascinating space that we live in these days around all of this. So yeah, just
Yeah, it really is.
yeah,
And I'm so glad to have you as my AAPI Heritage Month because I think overall in the US, we don't celebrate it as much. We are still made invisible, we are marginalized. And so we don't even ourselves celebrate it enough.
yeah.
So I'm just glad that you are with me this month. And I hope that listeners will continue to just come back to this podcast and listen to it throughout the year and not just
Yeah.
during the month of May. I think it's just important to celebrate our differences and different cultures that exist here in the US.
Well, yeah, and that I think one of the interesting things is that well, it's an important time, and especially these days, in the particularities of this season of 2021. If you are listening to this later on, where there's this rise in reported anti-Asian hate crimes, and there's this people trying to have a reckoning with what it means to be Asian American in the United States, and even the Asian American community being torn about how to approach safety and solidarity and all that. I think it's just it's such an interesting, important, I think, revelatory time for us as Asian Americans and as part of culture. That yeah, so I'm glad to be with you. So let's do it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's a good way to kind of lead into your book because your book is so important when we think about all these AAPI hate crimes and the violence and the verbal abuse that we're experiencing. So your book, In Defense of Kindness, actually helps us address these things. So I just want to read some of the endorsements that you got because I thought they were so good. One from Karen, from Bishop Karen Oliveto, who's Mountain Sky Conference. Part of it says, with self-reflective honesty and vulnerability, he shows us what a life of kindness entails, from the personal sphere to the public sphere. In Defense of Kindness challenges us to look at relationships through the lens of dignity and respect, and engage in behaviors and center kindness as a radical act that honors the humanity of all. And I just thought, that was such a wonderful endorsement. And I just want to say also that you begin your book with Mr. Rogers, a quote, and then you end with Mr. Rogers. And how you begin is there are 3 ways to ultimate success. The first is to be kind. The second is to be kind. And the third is to be kind. And that's from Reverend Fred Rogers, who is PCUSA minister. So I thought it was very appropriate. And then in the preface, you wrote, oh, that Mr. Rogers, I hope you're proud of yourself for the times you've said yes. when all it meant was extra work for you and was seemingly helpful only to somebody else. So that one you quoted from Fred Rogers. So, you got wonderful endorsements. I only just read one, and then you begin and you close the book with Fred Rogers. Can you just tell us what led you to write a book in defense of kindness? The subject of kindness, that's something that I would have never thought of writing a book on or even a blog on, but you wrote a whole book. And I must mention it's Chalice Press. So for those who are interested and want to read more, it's In Defense of Kindness from Chalice Press 2021. So what led you?
Yeah, so I had started this project. When it comes to book writing, there are folks like you who write out of a deep, moving academic space. Like, you're smart. Right, and you have you have the discipline. Now you're just going to take these affirmations. So there you go. You have this discipline.
Okay,
it's a genre. Like, I don't. There's not a competition between. Like, I'm sitting around with all this stuff in my head, and I come up with these great titles. I'm like the kid who comes up with band names before you learn how to play the instrument. And so I come up with these titles. I'm like, oh, there's a book in that. And so I came up with this idea because I think when folks meet me and they hang out with me and they know me, I think folks would generally say I'm a pretty kind person and that I'm pretty optimistic about the world and about people, which is not actually true. I mean, I actually am very cynical about the world, and I have to have a discipline to not let that to run my life and my worldview. And I really am much more. It's been a discipline and a practice for me to assume the best of people and assume that folks are more than this one-dimensional thing that they offer to the world or the world defines for them. And so that's really where this book is about, is that if I believe each of us is a complex created being, and not just believe it, but then I'm going to act as if that's true, that changes how I'm going to live in the world. And so I started having this idea. I wrote the proposal out, sent it into Chalice, and they accepted it. We wrote, this about, you write the contract and the whole thing. And then I said, I don't have the time, energy. I just can't do it. And I was not feeling kind about the world because this is after 2016. A couple years into that, I'm sitting in the movie theater watching Mr. Rogers' documentary, and it's his first episode. If you haven't seen the documentary, I highly encourage people to watch it. The first episode of Mr. Rogers is about King Friday building a wall around the kingdom in order to protect it. And then they look at the way that Mr. Rogers took on racism and where he sits in the pool with Francoise and I leaned over to my wife and I'm like, I probably should pick up this kindness book again. I mean, it feels like I was losing my commitment to the discipline. And then the next day, this is a true story. The publisher, Brad from Chalice, sends me an email and says, hey, you ready to pick up the kindness book? And I was like, whoa. So I finished it out. I wrote it pretty quickly, actually. It's not a long book. It's not, again, it's not a deeply academic researched book. It's a half memoir, half encouragement, inspiration. My target group are like first year in college. I want folks to enter that phase in their life with a different mindset about the world. I think we've ruined so much for that next generation that my gift and hope was to be like, let's look at the world through a different lens and act accordingly.
Yeah, well, you wrote a bit about that in the introduction too, because I remember you writing about how Brad from Chalice had emailed you that next day. So I'm glad you wrote about it. And for those who haven't watched the documentary, it was so moving. I thought, oh, it's going to be so boring.
Oh,
but I was like, it captivated me the whole length of the movie. I was so touched, and I just thought, I wish there were more Fred Rogers in the world,
Oh,
because our world will be so different. And actually, because you begin and you close with Fred Rogers, I was kind of excited about that, because anybody who thinks of Fred Rogers, all they can think of is, oh, he talked about kindness and being kind.
mhm.
And you were able to catch that in this very, very important book. Even though I think your target says first year college, I think it's a book for all ages. I think younger kids should pick it up, older people, and then, as you age, we can get a bit more hard-hearted
Yeah.
and more grumpy. And I think we need that kind of book, because you know what? I think myself, I'm very funny in person, but my books are kind of boring, right? Or some of them are, most of them are boring. But actually, your book was kind of exciting and so interesting, because you shared so much of your life. Was that hard to do, or is that easy to do? Because you share stuff that I thought, if I shared this, I would probably die if I shared some of my secrets. But
Well,
you openly shared so much.
but that's always been me. I think if folks know me, and if you followed my blogs and everything, so people are like, you share so much, but I'm like, well, I don't share everything though. Like, just so everybody knows, like, I'm not like, it's all relative, right? Privacy and
Yeah.
all that is all relative. But I think, for me, like in my preaching, in my speaking, if I don't feel moved by the thing that I'm doing, then good Lord, why would anybody else? So, and that's always been about, there was a time where you were taught preaching, like, don't talk about yourself. And there's a difference between making yourself the hero and saying, I've experienced these, here's how I've moved through this in a genuine way. And I always try to, make sure I don't cross that line. But part of me is like, I have been the privilege of living some kind of interesting things. Nothing hugely dramatic. Like, I don't have this like penultimate story that has defined my life. Like most of us, I think we just live life and we have all this stuff that goes on. And I think the more we are willing to share that in appropriate ways, the more we actually will get to see each other as more than one dimensional. Like, I'm on my Instagram feed, for instance. If folks go look at that at Reyes-Chow, like, for those that would say you need to do everything that's about social justice, they're going to be disappointed, because I just posted pictures about like a vacation with some friends, because that's part of what we do. And then I'll have a post that got hugely controversial about pushing on the Asian American community not to lean into anti-blackness and incarceration, and boy, I just got hate stuff, all that, right?
Really?
Oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah. You should go back and it's like, oh my goodness. But it was good to know and to realize that the Asian American community is hugely broad and split about how to handle stuff. So I think it's important for me to write in a way that feels real and genuine, because I think so many times preachers and speakers, it almost feels like it's performative, and that's never been me. Some people do that really well, and I won't take away from that, but that's not been me. I feel like folks,
Mhm.
once they get to know me, they feel like they know me, and generally they do. I mean, so it was cathartic. I'll tell you a quick story. I'm recording the audio book right now, kind of in these couple of weeks that we're talking, and there's a
Mhm.
chapter on my grandfather that I could not get through without crying.
Well, that's the one I wanted to get into. Oh,
I could
okay.
not get through it.
Because
So
that's the one I was going to go to.
I read it, and and you're trying to keep pushing through, and you have it, and I just left it, and in the notes, I'm like, so hey David, if you want me to re-record this, I can, but I think there's something about me being able getting through it, but this is I wrote it and I've read it multiple times, but reading it out loud,
Yeah.
it was just like my grandfather was sitting right next to me again, right? So it let me get all teary now. So yeah, I mean, yeah. Anyway, so thank you
Yeah.
for noticing that. I do try to be as personal and appropriate as possible in all of my writing.
Yeah. And when I say, you share a lot, and I think that's really good. And
Mhm.
people, and sharing is all relative too, and there are boundaries. So,
Yeah,
as you said too, because I actually share a lot in my blogs and my writing and preaching and public speaking.
yeah,
So people come up to me after and go, wow, you shared so much about your life. And I feel like my
yeah.
life is still so private, but but to the outside world, they think because I shared a story, it's like, oh my gosh, you're so public with your stories. But some of them you just repeat
Yeah.
over and over because some of them are so funny. But yeah, and I think the stories, and my first guest for Madang was actually Diana Butler Bass and her new book, Freeing Jesus. And this is something that a lot of women have a hard time because men keep telling us, don't talk about your experience, don't share. And, feminist theology example, all you do is share your stories and experiences. That's not theology.
Yeah.
And so I've always struggled with it. And in her book, she talks about memoir theology, how important it is. And when I think about that, and when she emphasized it, that's kind of like what I've been doing. And when we think of all of Christian theologians, so they had to have written from their life.
Yeah.
When we think about Luther and Augustine, everybody talked about their life, not in great detail, but surely their life came in. So that's why I really, really appreciated your book. And then the thing that you just mentioned about your grandmother, so I wanted to get to there.
Yeah.
That section was called, Sometimes It's Most Difficult to Be Kind to the People Who Are Closest to Us. And I thought, that is like a chapter for me or for all of us. And in Korea, we have a saying, those who are nice outside are so mean to those members when they come home. I'm not saying it correctly, but there's
yeah.
And I'm sure you understand. So tell us, but before you get into that, give us a definition of kindness, because I want for everyone to know, what do you mean by kindness, and then go to your grandmother's.
Yeah, no, I think that's important, because I think there is a little bit of a kindness industrial complex right now, where like be kind, like there's kindness bars, there's be kind t-shirt, all this stuff, and which it's not bad, but at the same time, like, okay, no. So you have that, and then you have people that if I were to ask anybody about if they have children or they're raising children or they're children adjacent, I'm like, do you want your child to be kind? Nobody says no, but yet nobody really wants to do it, because I think we have a warped sense of what that means. I have one of my, a common friend of ours on Twitter at one point during the book launch says, I don't want to read your book because it may force me to act differently.
And I think it will.
and I think one of the other reviews that I really appreciated was from Jeff Yang, and he said it made me really uncomfortable, because you have to, I'm pushing on our people to think back about how we treat one another, and I think that's okay, and I hope I'm a trusted source from that, right? That it's not as a matter of I disagree with you, so you have to act differently. Anyway, so when I think of kindness, I think too many people default to kindness just means being nice, avoiding conflict, letting things go. And that's not what I think when I define kindness. I define kindness as believing that every person is created and complex, and that you not just believe that, but that you act as if you believe it's true. Like it changes the way you behave. Because it's one thing for me to think ideologically or politically, yes, that person has a family, I'm sure they've had struggle, but I'm still going to be a jerk to them. And it's another thing to say, okay, that informs them, and I'm going to treat them in a way that I'm still going to call them on their stuff and challenge them, but I'm not going to do so in a way that strips away their humanity, because I don't want that done to me. I don't think that's a good model for our next generation. And I think it only divides us unnecessarily, simply because we can't see humanity in one another. And I just think that's not the way I choose to live. I feel it eating at my soul when I start to lean into that too much. And the story that you bring up about my grandmother. So my grandmother is one of those people that, you either call stubborn, determined, whatever. I mean, she was just a firecracker. She's the kind of person that she had to go in for surgery at one point because her arteries were all clogged up, because she smoked and ate pork adobo all the time, and she got the arteries cleared up, and then she was like this new person, and we're like, oh, that's what grandma's like. And then we go over like a week after she gets out of the hospital, and we walk into her house, and we walk into the kitchen, and she's clearly cooking pork adobo again, and she has a cigarette, and she's trying to hide it from us. I'm like, Grandma, But, and so we're at the point like, 80, 80, 81, 82. I'm like, whatever, you can do whatever you want. So this is kind of how she went through life. And so while there was this wonderful part about her, she was also had this kind of thing where she was kind of mean. Like she did what she was going to do and almost didn't care about it. And then combined with my grandfather, who was super sweet, the kindest person you'd ever meet. And I always default towards him. And it's just this kind of great convergence of good and bad together. And they eventually separated and divorced. And so the story I think you remember, though, is my grandmother was a deacon in our church. So for those of you not in the church, it's kind of the group that's charged with tending to the members and hospital visits and sickness and all that kind of thing. But my grandmother would never go to the hospital because she was always afraid that she was the one somebody was waiting for to show up before they could die. Like she always believed that you're always waiting for someone before you could die. And my grandmother was so I love the fact that she believed she was going to be the person for anybody who she visited in the hospital. They're waiting for me. I'm like, okay, Grandma. So that's her personality. And so when my grandmother was finally at her end of her life, and she was on life support and all these things. And if you read the story, I hope you find some humor and affection in it. But at the end of it, my mother leans over to my mom and whispers, Dad's not coming. Like if you're waiting for your ex-husband to come and show up, he's not coming. And then she died 20 minutes later.
But you forgot the part where you guys took her off.
Well, I know. Okay, so that spoiler.
That's the important. Yeah, that's
spoiler alert. This is so funny.
I know your book better than you.
There's so much of in that whole episode that's not even in the book.
Yeah, like that's true.
My church at that point had the worst pastor ever. Oh, he was horrible. And my mom and I are both ministers. So we told him during this phase of my grandmother's death, you be the family pastor. Like we're going to be family members. Do not, and I know that I and my mother, we can be a little intimidating if we want to be, but we were very clear with him. We are just going to be family. You be our pastor. It was the funeral of Princess Diana. We're sitting there in the room. My grandmother's like hit or miss, and he says, I'm going to go watch the funeral. Let me know if you need me.
That you should have put in the book. Oh my goodness, I can't believe that.
So the other one is he comes in and his shirt is like wrinkled and some of my siblings look at my mom and I are like, can't the church afford to buy him an iron? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. And then the best part is, I should have put this part in. It was just because it was really funny, but I tried not to make it too much of a religious book. So he comes in and we're all sitting around, and this is towards the end. We were just deciding to take my grandmother off of life support. She's bloated. Like my mom and I are ready to take her off life support days earlier, but the rest of the family quite wasn't ready. And he looks at her and he says, "This is the face of Jesus." And we're all like, Jesus is a bloated, dying 84-year-old woman? Like, what? And all the people there are like, what does that even mean? I'm like, I don't know. He's just saying words now. So yeah, we had the worst. Oh my goodness. So, but anyway, so my grandmother, this stubborn nature of her. So yeah, I'll give away the heart of the story. So the stubborn nature of her, we're all around her. We had all said our goodbyes, and I had told people that when you turn off the machines, it's not as if they take one grasp and then they're like they ease into death. If anybody's ever had to be with folks, and so turn off all the machines and they're waiting. Like everybody you could just see is waiting, and then she breathes, and then she keeps breathing. And I think my relatives were like, "She's gonna die, right? Like it's gonna be instantaneous." I'm like, "Yeah, it might take a few minutes," and then it was like hours. And we just started laughing. Our whole family is standing around our dying grandmother laughing. People must have been like, what is going on in there? But, I think for those of you that have been in those moments of deep grief, but also deep affection and deep love, and you're so tired, and sometimes all you can do is laugh because it just feels good. It's cathartic and it's healing. And we were like doubled over laughing so hard that grandma basically said to us, "Oh, you think you can decide for me? But when have you ever decided for me?"
Yeah.
And then my mom whispered to her, "Dad's not coming." Grandma's like, "Okay, then I'm out." That's basically what happened. And we're like that was totally, as the young people say, totally on brand. She died on her terms, lived on her terms. And sometimes those terms weren't always great. I think that was part of the chapter, is that I think she took advantage of my grandfather. She often wasn't the kindest person in the world. And sometimes that creates these schisms that can't be repaired, and we have to decide whether we're going to live with those or not. And I think it's a really hard thing to do, because it requires us to step into spaces and maybe admit that we hold some part of why that division is there. And none of us really wants to do that. We may all talk about wanting to be humble and willing to change and all that, but most of us really don't want to do that. Like, it's just too hard. How hard is it to apologize to your child, right? The times I've had to apologize to my child are really hard, but you're choosing your relationship. And if you don't heal it, or if you, as the parent, if you don't model, here's how I may have messed up and I apologize and I'm going to try to be better in the future. If you don't model that for our kids, how are they going to do that with those closest to them in the future of their life? So that's why I wrote that chapter. And I think folks might have been like, "Are you going to talk bad about your grandma?" I'm like, this is just my grandmother. This is just how she was. And, the best and worst
I thought
of
you
her.
wrote it beautifully. It was funny, so I was able to laugh. I felt bad laughing, but you kind of, because it's such a serious moment,
Yeah.
but then you brought in all that. So I just thought, you're right. It's so witty, but you get to the point with your personal story. So I really actually appreciate it, because, these are stories that you share that are so common to a lot of us,
Yeah.
with people dying and then, raising kids and all that. So I really appreciated that chapter. And then the other chapter, there's so many good pieces here, because of lack of time, we're not going to get to all of them. I thought, we live in this digital world, and now with the pandemic, everything is digital. I even actually ended up doing a wedding via Zoom, because it was in Canada and the border is still closed.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so we are online a lot. And so you wrote a chapter on the digital aspect and so forth, and you shared about how Roseanne, and I thought, wow, Roseanne
I know.
trolled you, because part of that, and then you put the screenshot in your book. He loves to chow. Well, there was a longer, but I just took a little. And what she tweeted, which was so horrible, he loves to chow too much. I just thought, where is Roseanne thinking that she can just write these crazy tweets? And you gave the context of it. So we live in this digital world. We're on Zoom, more than we need to be. And we're on social media, etc. How do we become kind with one another in this digital world? And what happens when you have people like Roseanne trolling us or trolling you, and they do things like this? So what do we do?
I think there's a couple of things that go into it. That is not my favorite chapter, just in terms of but it's been one of the most popular ones. So I'm not surprised about that. I think because I think there's something to people needing to realizing that I can't just react to everything. We're so reactive as a culture now that sometimes we have to think through why we're doing what we're doing. And so what I do is I just provide a bunch of filters. Basically, I sat there and was like, well, how do I feel like I have a pretty healthy online presence, and 95% of my interactions are positive. I generally don't step into interactions that that are not worthy of my time and energy. I feel like for some reason we feel like we have to accept every invitation to every war that is out there, and we don't have to do that. And we believe that everybody is entitled to our time, or people think
Mm.
just because I was the moderator of a denomination that you now are entitled to my time. And that's not true. If you're going to be a jerk, I don't have to do that. Now, if you want to engage, that's totally different. But if you're just coming in lobbing stuff in, I will block or mute you in a minute. So I don't have any problem with that. But I think what I think one of the overarching cultural things for progressives especially is, the idea that if you're silent, that you are in some ways, right, you're affirming it. Silence is affirmation. And while that is true in some context, you can't respond to everything online. Like, it's just
Mhm.
physically impossible. And so you can't carry that same idea into a Twitter space or a Facebook space or any of that, because you can't. And what you end up doing is, I think what happens is, you begin to believe that you are the purveyor of all things that are right and just. And so it's my job to go and correct everybody. And that's just not a place that I want to be in. So I have to think about, how do I use my online time in a way that's most effective for me? Who am I amplifying? Right? What voices am I amplifying along with my own? I mean, I'm unapologetically that we're all trying to amplify our voices in some way. But who else? Right? Who else am I amplifying? Am I retweeting or pushing the social media presence I have, pushing it towards organizations or people that are doing good work in the world? Am I as funny as I think I am? I think too many of us think like we're not that. Like, I feel like I'm funny sometimes. Sometimes I'm not, and I'm like, okay, that I'm not as funny as I think I am, and I'm not paid to be funny. Like, that's not my. If you're a satirist and people are paying you, that's one thing. So I think people often forward stuff on that simply isn't helpful. And I think the biggest filter is around, are we engaging in tactics that we would condemn from other spaces? And President Trump is a great example. I tried not to talk about him as much as I can in the book, and it's probably too much. And they tried to make me take more out, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to take more out. But I watch my progressive colleagues, when they critique President Trump, as if there weren't actual policy and actions to critique his hair, his skin color, his physical ability, his weight, all of the things that if I'm a person that happens to be heavier, and I'm a person that's always struggled with weight, so now because you've determined that he is fat, he is awful, not because of his policies, but I'm going to go out and because his hair isn't good, or he needs to use a handrail to walk down a ramp. I'm like, what kind of ableist kind of stuff is that? And I only think about my friends who have reminded me over and over again, the font that you use on your Instagram or on your stuff has to be able to be read by people who have eyesight issues, right? If you're not putting descriptors of your images on your Instagram posts or your other things, right? All these things. So I want people, as they're online, is to think through these filters about how do we encourage goodness in one another? How do we impact in the way that we want it to impact without diving into the negative stuff that I think has exacerbated these divides? And so the filters that I offer in the book are really just a way for us to, before you tweet, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? And just take a breath, take a step back. Like, just don't fire stuff off like anything, right? I mean, it's just, anyway. So yeah, again, these things have come natural to me over the years. And then I just sat down and I wrote them down. I'm like, oh, these seem to be good. And folks have found them helpful.
Yeah, I think it's a very helpful thing, especially if you're targeting young kids, because they feel like they can just do whatever they want. There won't
Yep.
be any consequences, but there are.
Yeah.
And everything gets saved on the web. people people don't realize it, so you have to be so careful. And I think the kindness rule is so important. Whatever we do online or in person, I think that's what we are called to do, to be kind.
Yeah.
So I thought that chapter was very, very important, and I really appreciated it. So I'm so glad you put that in. I'm glad that other people are appreciating what you're saying about this digital, because we are living in this digital world, and so much of our presence is digitalized. So, your book also talks about abusive relationships. So how are we to deal with abusive relationships and do this kindness? So I
Yeah.
don't know. Did you share?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just brief. I use my mother as a model in this one, and that she was in her second marriage was horrible, and David was awful, and we were joking that he was Korean, so I was Bruce Kim for a while. But he was one of those. I tell a few stories in there that the ultimate kind of illustration of David is that he would just get mad at me for no matter what. I was his stepson, which I think played into this a little bit. And there was one point, I don't remember what I did. I was probably just being five, like 5-year-olds do, and he was very much my way or the highway, and literally, so we were in the car, and I must have said something. And granted, I was a determined child, so. And he said, "Well, you could get out and walk then." And so we're on the freeway, and he makes my mother open the door, and as a 5-year-old, he pulls over on a freeway, and I get out of the car and start walking. So, that in itself, right there, so many parts in that are obviously flags for a person's personality and everything, and lots of different other things. He was physically abusive to me. I don't know about my mom. I would assume so, but my mom left him, and same with my birth father, who I have a good relationship with now. Left him as well because he was not in a good space when they were 19 when they had me. And I've always thought my mother took the best of who my grandmother was. The grandmother I talked about before was her mom, like self-determined and willing to strike out on her own. And my mom made choices to be kind to herself, to say to herself, I am a complex, created human, and I need to act in a way that I believe that to be true. And for her, the kindness for her, and I think for David, the perpetrator, was to no longer have that relationship and that situation be in existence. And so I think that part of kindness to ourselves is acknowledging and acting in a way that honors the humanity in ourselves. And so when my mother left my father and my stepfather, those were gestures towards herself. And I think sometimes, especially for women, we don't encourage that. And I think more men need to do that, because I think a lot of women encourage that among each other as in support and solidarity. But I think when especially in relationship situations, that we have to allow for people to make those choices without instantly, in some conservative spaces, that you're giving up on a marriage, or you're all this is in your head, or you're being too sensitive, or all the gaslighting that goes on. I just feel like we have to make these choices for ourselves sometimes, and more than not, culture has told, and I would say especially women, not to make that choice. So my mother has shown me, and I hope my children and her grandchildren, that sometimes the best thing to do is to walk away. And I've used that for myself. I'm like, I want to be as confrontational as the last person, but sometimes you got to be able to step back and be like, this is not good for any of us involved. I got to step away. Even if it feels like you're giving in or you're giving up, it's not. You're actually taking on something better. And so, yourself. So.
Yeah. And actually, it does take a lot of courage to do that,
Mm-hmm.
to step away. So I'm so glad you covered, your book covers so much in that small book. Actually, the
Yeah.
wealth of and the context is so diverse and so good. So I really, really loved your book. And as we're kind of wrapping up this episode, what I really liked about the book is every section ends with these like tips, or for you have
Mm-hmm.
a for reflection, and then try this.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it. And I think that's really handy for not just young readers, but older readers who want to do and be different in this world and be more kind, especially, as we're celebrating AAPI Heritage Month. There's so much abuse and violence toward Asian Americans here in the US and in other parts of the world. How can we just learn to love and be kind?
Yeah.
That's so hard. So as we close, I wanted to ask you, there's so many practical tips and so forth. So can you share one or two kind of practical
Mhm.
things that we can apply that's either in the book or you wish you put in the book after it got published? Is
Yeah.
there something that, because we're all searching, and I think our listeners are probably searching too. How can I live differently? Because you do talk about
Yeah.
forgiveness in this book, which is another whole thing. And if we had a whole day to talk about it, I'll get into that forgiveness.
Yeah.
But how do we, what is your final kind of words of wisdom
Yeah.
of how we can live this way?
So I think, just quick, I think to be kind, and I think you used this quote earlier in the week, right? This isn't just something you do. Like, this isn't just, okay, I'm gonna be kind to, and you just automatic. Like, it's a discipline, like anything else. To be anti-racist, to be, a feminist, to be whatever. Like, we've been trained not to do this, so now we have to choose to do it and be disciplined in it. So I encourage everybody, the next time they're in any line, to just think about what's a gesture of kindness to think about, in the idea that any interaction you have in that line, whether it's with the barista or the person near you, that it's about understanding that that person may have a complex life going on. And how do you interact? Because I actually think that every interaction is either positive or negative. Very few neutral interactions in our lives. And so, like, if somebody looks like they're in a hurry, I'll be like, hey, go ahead. Why don't you just go ahead, without being passive aggressive, right? I've seen people do it. We're like, oh, looks like you're in a hurry. Why don't you go ahead of me? Like, that's not helpful. I'm like, no, actually, why don't you go on ahead? And I'll just, like, I'm kind of hanging out, like, and in a way that actually is a gesture of kindness that doesn't demand reciprocation. It's not transactional. It's just simply saying, oh, you're a complex person and maybe you look like you're having a tough time. And just there's all these, but you have to think about it so that you don't do it in a way that is the antithesis of what you're trying to do. And it's tiring. It's tiring, honestly. And so, but the more you do it, I think it's a muscle that we work on, and you're going to pull it sometimes and it's going to be sore, but over time it becomes the natural way that we're being in the world. So that's what I hope for everybody.
Oh, thank you so much, Reverend Bruce Reyes-Chow. This conversation, it was so enriching for myself, and I'm sure for all the listeners. Thank you I know you're on vacation. Thank you so much for spending time with me on Madang podcast. And I hope that you'll come back again to join me.
Yep.
So thank you so much. And the book is called In Defense of Kindness, published by Chalice Press. I hope everyone gets it, either digital or in hard copy. And then your audio will be coming out soon.
Yeah, audio will be out this summer. Yep.
Oh, that's so exciting. So congratulations on your latest book. Thank you for spending some time with me. And I hope everyone else has a wonderful day. Thank you for listening to Madang.
Celebrate AAPI Heritage Month together and pre-order the book, Invisible, on fortresspress.com and any other place books are sold. Mandy Ford is an artist and teacher specializing in hope-filled products, including stickers and art prints, digital and printable products, and creative courses to help your soul live a happier life. She is also the founder of Soul Care Creatives Club, a monthly membership club offering creative resources for soul care. Find out more at www.mandyford.co, follow her on her social media at mandyfordart, and visit her shop at mandyfordart.etsy.com. Diana Butler Bass goes beyond the culture wars to offer a refreshing take on the comprehensive, multifaceted nature of Jesus, keeping his teachings relevant and alive in our daily lives. Join the Louisville Institute to celebrate the retirement of Don C. Ryder as Associate Director on June 28, 2021 from 3:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time via Zoom. For free registration, go to www.facebook.com/Louisville Institute for more information. For sponsorship inquiries, please email madangpodcast.gmail.com.